Hey everybody, Corey Hirsch here again with another episode of The Mind Game. Wow, what a guest we have today, Clint Malarchuk. First of all, I'll bring in Dr. Diane McIntosh, who is forcing me to call her Diane, even though she's earned that title of doctor. But hey Diane, how are you?
Oh, just grand. Corey, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. What a great day we had yesterday. We had Chrissy Hodges on. We talked relationships and just to recap that a little bit, yesterday's episode, to me, it sounded like it all boils down to communication, from both partners or whoever you're dating, especially if you have one that has a mental health issue, or another that is struggling with, something else going on. So I thought yesterday it all boiled down to communication.
Yeah, if you can possibly boil down a relationship to one thing, since all of my relationships are more complicated than that. But you're absolutely right. The success of a relationship is predicated, especially if you're going into it with a mental health challenge, on making sure that you communicate effectively.
Yeah, and that's what it boiled down to, is talking about it. And sometimes we find it difficult to talk about our mental health issues with our significant other. But if you don't, the results can be, a failed relationship and amongst other. And you really don't want to leave your partner out in the dark. And I thought yesterday with the communication we had with Chrissy Hodges, it was fantastic. And she gave a lot of good advice. And the biggest thing that I came out of something like that too was we talked about boundaries. Setting boundaries in relationships, what is acceptable, what isn't. But as far as letting your partner know when you're struggling, seemed to be something that a lot of people, they're trying to figure it out. That's something that a lot of people struggle with. And I struggle with that too, but we had a great day yesterday. But I have a great guest today, a good friend of mine, a mentor of mine, who when I came out with my story, he was one of the first people I called. To see how, what to expect and whether or not I should, come out with my story. And Clint's been really instrumental in all of my stuff, and a great human being, author of The Crazy Game. He's been through so much in his life. He's dedicated his life now to helping others with mental health issues. And Clint lives in Reno, Nevada, and we're going to join him on his ranch right now. Clint, how are you, bud?
Well, I'm doing all right. Doing pretty good.
You look good.
Well, I'm trying.
Meet Diane McIntosh.
Hello, Dr. Diane. How are you?
I'm just grand. So nice to meet you. I wish I had worn my hat.
I'm a doctor too.
Yes,
I heard that.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
No, I'm just honorary. I didn't earn it.
Still, it's a great honor.
You're forcing us to call you Dr. Clint Malarchuk, though.
Yeah, why not, huh? Dr. Diane.
You spelled your name wrong, Clint. Oh,
yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. But you know what? We're happy to have you. Your story is incredible. I guess we'll start a little bit. We'll get your story, and then I want to talk to you about a bunch of different things, masculinity, a lot of different. It's just so much. You and I have very similar paths when we talk. Yeah. Yours is, you were almost a generation before mine of hockey, and there was even more of a stigma, more of a masculine issue. Yeah. Well, no, it's and you're way better shape than I am, and you could probably still kick my ass too. So I don't worry about that. But just tell us about what it was like growing up. You grew up in, was it Grand Prairie, Alberta?
Well, I started in Grand Prairie, then we kind of moved down south to Edmonton and down south to Calgary. But I always call Grand Prairie home in my roots. I have many relatives up there. But I struggled immensely as a kid. Now, that being said, I also had a very abusive alcoholic father. Great guy, don't get me wrong. But, just that alcohol, and it's a progressive disease. And unfortunately, I inherited that. And so I had so much anxiety, Corey and Dr. Diane, that school was definitely not my thing. I hated school. I wasn't good at school because probably, and this is all reflecting back, because back in those days, I even got hospitalized when I was 10 or 11 years old for 2 months. And they after that, they just sedated me. There was no counseling or therapy or anything. They just kept sedating me. And then they turned me loose to my mom and said, good luck, ma'am. You got a very anxious kid. Uncontrollably crying, worried about everything. The neighbor kid next door, or across the street, or this and that, and just anything would upset me. And I always had that constant knot in my stomach. And again, reflecting back, my whole deal with hockey, and I did have OCD, undiagnosed, of course, and definitely anxiety and depression, suicidal thoughts, even at that young age. And now we're getting that more and more with our kids. And I'm going, oh my God, how did they do that? Well, you know what? I went through that too as a kid. And for me, it was just a constant battle. And I used to tell my mom all the time, my stomach's churning. And she didn't understand what, she was my support. She was my everything. And, I kind of got through. I don't know how. I really don't know how. Doc, you might be able to, because I heard later on, this is all, I learned my education on mental illness way, way long after I was a kid and after my NHL career, that mental illness can kind of go dormant and then come back. It's like a hill and a valley, and I think I experienced that. So I got through my teens. My OCD on the outdoor rinks growing up in Grand Prairie and then Edmonton, it was, that was the only time I was free from my obsessions. It was the only time but I reflect back, I had to walk about a mile back home across a big snowfield. And I pulled my toboggan with all my hockey gear. And this would be 9-10 at night, even on school nights, because they had to chase me home. And the closer I got to home, Doc, the more that stomach and that knot, and oh my God, but was I mentally ill at that time, or did my father cause my mental illness, or was it just it was a product of a dysfunctional family? I don't know. Really, it doesn't. My journey so far along now, it doesn't matter. I went on with my career, obviously, and Corey, you can relate to this because we had the same mental disorder. And I just got to backtrack Corey comes up to me one time. He's the goalie coach with St. Louis. I'm the goalie coach with Calgary. And he comes up, and this is like 2 years probably before he came out with this story. And he pulled me aside and he said, Clint, I one day you and I are going to talk, and I'm not going to tell you anything more than that right now. And Hirsch, I was going to say Hirsch, that shite thing, but he goes, like 2 years later, we started communicating and talking. I think I was out of the game. I'm not sure, but and he came out with his article in the Players Tribune, which was totally heart-wrenching and moving, and gave a lot of people hope and inspiration. Hats off to you, Corey. Yeah, I do have hair still. And then we communicated quite a bit, and I'm still encouraging him to write a book because it'd be a great one and help a lot of people, because I know what that did for me. And so where was I then before I backtracked?
Well, no, you went. Well, we'll just go.
Oh, my career, and
yeah, you went to junior hockey. You played in Portland, did you?
Yeah,
not?
and I was really homesick, and my first year wasn't good. My second year got a little better, but I was just. Was I homesick? Because my mom and I really bonded, because Dad had finally left, and we had a lot of. I'm not sure what you call it now. Codependency, or like we had and I tell my mom, don't ever take this the wrong way. I was like her mate, and she was like, I was her support with everything, because she had to go back in the workforce after years, and she was obviously always my support. And somehow we got through that homesickness and everything. I play up 1989, so I played a few years in the NHL. And then I cut my jugular vein. That's what I'm famous for. I wasn't very good as a goalie, but everybody remembers me. And it was that I got through that first season, or after it happened in March. So I got through the season. I came back in 10 days like a stud. I'm a cowboy. I'm a hockey player. I was a boxer. Physically tough. What do you do when you get bucked off a horse? Get right back on. So I came back in 10, 11 days, and I was a hero for doing that. I epitomized everything they loved in Buffalo with the Sabres I was playing for. And I had so much love and support. I epitomized everything they loved in that blue collar sports town, like gritty, courageous, hardworking, no talent. and it was I got through that season. It was the next season where I really started to come apart.
Yeah.
And of course, what do, Corey? We do it in silence.
Yep.
And I did it, and I didn't sleep for 10 days because I started to have the nightmares. That skate would come up, and I'm telling you, I'd straight up in bed, boom, and I'd be grabbing my neck. So it's not just Dr. McIntosh. It wasn't just a bad dream. I'm reliving trauma over and over and over. And I'm not telling anybody because we can't. We're athletes, and I was in my option year of a contract. There was a lot of reasons, but mostly is my pride and ego that I just wanted to get back in there, face your fear, which I did. And when I came back the next season, my God, I didn't sleep. Well, what I do, I'm sitting on a stool right now in my tack shed, and I sit there because now I can't really fall asleep and dream. I'll bobble, like on an airplane. You don't really, fall asleep. So I did that for 10 days. And finally, I had an overdose with pain medication and alcohol because I started to self-medicate. And so I wake up in the hospital because my heart has stopped. And doctor thought it might be a suicide. And I talked to a psychiatrist in there, and I said, "No, sir, it wasn't." He said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, I can't sleep. I have these flashbacks. I have to clean the house at 3 a.m. My OCD was off the charts. It was hard for me to leave the house. Panic attacks, all these things, depression. It was just painful. And when I speak about mental illness, I often say, because I'm physically pretty tough, and I hang my hat on that. But I tell people I'd rather have my throat cut 1,000,000 times or not have mental illness. I've had back surgeries, neck surgeries, knee surgeries. I can do that. That mental illness is more painful than anything physical I've ever endured, and I've endured a lot. So to continue on, they got me on medications, and we're going back, a lot of years, and thank God we've come so far with our diagnosis, medications, therapies, counseling, all these things. Back then and so I was seeing several therapists, different doctors, different medications, and it was a tough go. It was about 3 years, and my play is just going, I couldn't stop a beach ball. And so they sent me to the minors. And so I'm devastated going to the minors because my NHL career, I think, is done. And at my first game in the minors, I let in 4 goals on 6 shots. And even for me, that's not very good. And I remember putting a towel over my head. They pulled me from the game after the first period, and I put a towel over my head, and I sat on the bench, and I cried the whole game.
Take your time. Yeah.
I still get emotional, and you know what? I will never, ever apologize for that because it's good. It's processing. Anyways, so I go into our coach after the game, Rick Dudley. I said, "I'm done. I retire. I'm a mess." He goes, "It's one game." He didn't understand that I was still, because he knew I had issues in Buffalo, because he coached me 1 year in Buffalo before he got fired. And so that's why I went to San Diego. I had a couple other choices when they cut me loose, and I felt safe with Rick, and it was a great choice.
So, Clint, do you mind if I take a minute to make a couple of comments about what you said? Because first of all, I want to give you a second because you're incredibly brave, and it's inspiring to listen to you. And one of the things that you said that I think was so critically important was you're clearly a tough guy, my daughter has played soccer forever, and I'm sorry, rolling around on the field. And then here's a guy who's basically got his neck cut off, and he's going, okay, can I make it back for the third period? It's a different breed of person who's a tough guy like that. And to see the power that your past has on you shows you the power of mental illness, so shows you the power of trauma. And so I think everyone needs to see that. When I worked for the military, PTSD, in a PTSD clinic, and the people would say to me, not uncommonly, my God, I wish my leg had been blown off, because at least people could see what was wrong with me. And so you're an embodiment of coming through the challenge, and it's a bigger challenge than people actually understand, that you can be the toughest guy in the world.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And like I said, I've always, partly because of the way I grew up, and that, toughness was everything. And that's why I grew up like, get back on the horse, don't cry. And isn't that something with the stigma of mental illness? I remember growing up, and if you got your feelings hurt or whatever, and you tear up, and my dad would say, well, I'll give you something to cry about. And he'd raise his hand. And so the lesson is, if I whoop you, give you a smack, it's okay to cry. I'll give you something to cry about. But what you're sniveling about, and you're depressed or anxious or whatever, no, that's, and that was my parent. Yeah. But he didn't understand either. I think he was mentally ill, and that's why he became an alcoholic, because there's a huge correlation between mental illness and addiction and self-medicating. Yeah. A lot of people.
Diane, you say that Clint actually did want to go back in the game. I think you told me the story. They were cutting your jersey, and you're like, you've got your neck cut, and they're cutting your jersey, and you're PO'd that they're cutting your jersey.
Yeah.
Your equipment.
Yeah.
And that's just the mentality.
Yeah, but you know what? I was going from I'm dying here, yet I go right to the other side and go, I got to get back in the game. And that's what the masculinity and jocularity and even the gallows humor that we have in sports, say, Corey. I was joking halfway, but on the other side, I really wasn't joking that much. I did want to, because I was fearful for my job.
Yeah. So we'll continue a little bit on with your story, because it's so incredible. But you go on now. You're struggling, right? Now you're self-medicating. And then so you finish your career, you become a goaltending coach. And then you're, how is that going from, playing to that transition and still struggling the way that you were?
Well, if it wasn't for a famous doctor, Dr. Stahl down in San Diego, after Rick, pulled me, got me in to see Dr. Stahl. And remember, I'd seen 3 years of different doctors and medications. He nailed it. And he was totally cool. He was confident, arrogant almost. And he said, we're going to put you, he goes, you have a chemical imbalance, just like a diabetic. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, really? Like a diabetic? You mean, their pancreas causes insulin. This is a chemical imbalance. Yours is of the brain. That's why I went, no kidding, doc, I'm a goalie. So unbelievable. I tried so many medications, and he put me on this one, and it just 6 weeks. I remember I'm in San Diego, California, playing in the minors, and I'm driving to see Dr. Stahl once a week. On week 6, I'm going, wow, the temperature here is unbelievable. Oh, I rolled down my window. Oh, that air. So my depression was so bad, I didn't even notice the weather in Southern California in like February. And I go, Doc, I think my depression is lifted. At week 9, I had no more intrusive thoughts, the ruminating of OCD thoughts. I just couldn't turn off. I always thought my wife was cheating. I had a lot of relationship, like you talked to Chrissy, and I know Chrissy too, Hodges. Definitely relate to, well, different, but the same. I've been married 4 times. So, and I know why I got divorced, because I was a mess, and I'm constantly ruminating on things. I think with OCD, we fear the things or the things that bother us the most Or I used to worry about my mom. Is she okay? Because we were so close. So I used to ruminate about her dying or things like that. But Dr. Stahl fixed me up. I went 15 years doing great. And then I had a slide where, well, I'm back in the NHL coaching. I coached in the minors, and I just went 15 years taking this medication, thinking I'm good to go. Never ever saw Dr. Stahl again, because when you're in professional sports, and we've heard of other things where they get prescriptions and this and that. Well, mine wasn't for painkillers or anything. It was for my mental illness. And so I for 15 years renewing a prescription, now it's not working anymore. My body was getting immune to it. Then Richard Zednick cut his jugular vein, and I was working with the Columbus Blue Jackets then. So I was very, very media accessible. And so they're interviewing me. I'm reliving it again. My meds aren't working, and boom, I went worse than ever. And I thought to the darkest of dark. Now I'm pitch black.
Yeah.
And that's when I started to self-medicate again. And one day right behind this tack shed, in fact, in the barns right here, I went there and I was shooting targets, rabbits, everything. And Joni came home. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. And I remember sitting there and she goes, "Clint, what is wrong?" Because I've been drinking a lot. I hadn't slept, and again, I'm not sleeping. And I'm just drinking and hopefully pass out. And that would work. But the demons weren't going away. And that day, I put the gun under here and just poof, shot myself. And I didn't even lose consciousness because I'm a goalie and I got a thick head. So the bullet got lodged in my skull. And I remember the paramedics and the cops and everything. And, it was awful. And so I wouldn't even get on the helicopter. They wanted to life flight me, and they're going, "Sir, you have a bullet in your head. It could move. We don't know what's going on." So I'm fine. I can stitch up my own chin. I'm fine. I'll stitches here. And I'm bleeding profusely from my nose and mouth. And I guess they sedated me and just boom, I'm out, and flew me to Reno. I'm about an hour south of there. And that's where I got, they put me into a coma, and the swelling was getting bad, and they're worried about it. So they didn't remove the bullet. So, I don't know if I'm proud to say on that ego part, that masculinity part, I'm kind of proud to say, you know what, I'm walking around with a bullet in my head. I'm one tough son of a gun, right? But I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks, and then they sent me to a treatment center, psychiatric center, and that's where I got healthy, got my meds back right, got really good, and life went on. And that's where I began to think about, I almost died 3 times: the jugular vein, the overdose on pills and medication, which was actually an accidental overdose, because I read the prescription: "Do not drink without alcohol, will make you drowsy." And I'm like, right on, because I hadn't slept in 10 days. So I'm not thinking right. I got sleep deprivation. And that's when I took just a few extra painkillers and drained a bottle of scotch, and my heart stopped. So that's 2. And then the suicide attempt is 3. So you know how lucky I am. And you really reflect on your life and what is I believe God saved me for those that are still suffering, suffering in darkness and silence. And I know Corey understands that phrase very well.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a book, and the book changed my life. Absolutely 100%. And I put my email in the back of the book, and I could not believe how many people reached out. I went, oh my God, I'm so not alone. Mm-hmm. There's so many people. There's so many Clint Malarchuks out there. There's so many Joni Malarchuks, my wife, who have lived through this trauma and abuse, verbal abuse, because I blamed her for everything. That's what we do. We blame our closest, and because we feel safer with them, I guess. They're not going to leave us, hopefully. The things I said to her, if I would have said to Corey as a friend, he would have punched me in the nose, right? But, so that began my journey of recovery, mental health advocacy, public speaking, just kind of paralleling Corey's life now. I'm just a few years ahead of them. That's all.
Clint, that's so powerful, and thank you, for sharing. I've known you a long time, and I don't think I've ever really sat down and talked with you, even heard you. We've talked bits and pieces, but just unbelievable. And there's just so much to unwrap, right? It's the one of the things that you say that about the hockey inside the rink when you were a kid, and even probably when you were playing, that was the only time I didn't have felt like I didn't have mental health issues. That was the only time. And then the minute I stepped off the ice and sat down in the locker room, boom, it was right back. But it was like there was a barrier, right? I mean, I
hear you, brother.
Yeah. And just, and Diane, I'll ask you this, but I'll ask Clint first. Like, I talk a lot about early diagnosis, right? Like, and you had a lot more going on too as well, but with your father and all that. But if you could have gotten help, they sent you home when you were a kid, right? Like, they sent you home, said, hey, you got an anxious child. Well, I mean, that's when you needed the help, right? I mean, that's when I needed the help, was when I was a kid. Like, how much different do you think? I mean, we can't go back. I don't want to, no regrets, but how much different do you think your life would have been if you could have gotten help back then?
My mom speaks on that all the time. We're very close today.
Yeah.
And she loves what I'm doing and everything. She goes, God, Clint, I'm so proud of you, because when you were going through your stuff, and she was trying to, help and do what she could and find doctors, and there was nothing back then. She goes, I'm proud of you, and thank God there is so much. We're so much better years later. We got doctors like Dr. McIntosh and Dr. Stahl who helped me. That was a long time ago still, but why was he the only one that could nail it for me? Now there's so much more education and support. And yes, we do fight the stigma still, but we've come a long ways with it too.
Yeah. Diane? I know you got lots to
say. There's so much,
right?
So much. Clint, thank you so much for sharing. And well, first of all, I know Dr. Stahl, and you're very fortunate to have someone who, I mean, the man knows medication. He knows psychopharmacology. I've learned so much from him over the years. But, and I am an eternal optimist. We need you, and we need Corey to be doing what you're doing, because the stigma regarding mental illness still lives. In fact, it lives in medicine. The reason that we don't have access, we don't have enough of evidence-based treatments, we don't have the ability to get people the mental health they need, even when they're young, when and where they need it, is because the stigma lives in medicine. So, you going, and people still go to their family doctor, and God love them, family doctors bear the weight of mental illness in Canada and the US. They do most with very little support, but there's still some out there that don't buy it, don't believe it, don't care to help. We need to change that. And the only way we change that is by winning the hearts and minds of citizens, and people talking about, this is what this is about. Everyone in the world is touched by mental illness, maybe not themselves personally, but someone they love. Mm-hmm. But it's these stories that are so powerful in changing the way that the world views mental illness.
Well, there's people that I talk to. I'm very open out there, my email, messenger on Facebook, all these things. And and then I usually end up talking to people, because I can't text worth a damn. So I give them my phone number, just call me, bud. And I always ask them, are you on medication? Oh, no, I don't want to go on medication. I'm like, okay, I have a chemical imbalance. All the medication does is balance out it helps me produce more serotonin, which I obviously don't produce enough of. And then I use Dr. Stahl's analogy, what he told me, 30 some years ago, whatever. It's like a diabetic. So where's the shame? And I do this sometimes in my talks, especially, in the younger generation who are anti-drug or medication. And I'll say, so how many diabetics? And usually people aren't ashamed. They raise their hands. And there's no shame in being diabetic. And being diabetic is a chemical imbalance. So then I go into saying, okay, so what's the difference if my chemical imbalance just happens to be in the brain? There's no difference. And it's funny, Dr. Stahl too. I know he went on to be pretty renowned. He went lecturing and touring, and he was. I don't know if he's a pioneer, but he sure saved my life. And I'll never forget walking out of his office, because I'd seen so many doctors and counselors and therapists, and I'm not disregarding that family and child abuse or whatever happened in a person's life can affect them. I'm sure it really affected me big time as a kid, the abuse and the abuse to my mother that I saw. But I remember walking out with the prescription, and I stopped and I said, "Hey, doc, you never even asked me about my dad." He goes, "Why? Is he sick too? Bring his ass in here. I'll fix him."
So Dr. Stahl.
It was all about the chemical imbalance.
Yeah.
And we all have issues. We grow up, dysfunctional families, some more than others or whatever. Who's got the perfect life? Some do, some don't. I don't know. But I'm very firm believer that medication, and today, because I've learned so many other things too, meditation has come very mindfulness, all these things. My medication has been weaned down, and I thought I would never ever think that I can function on what I am today, because I was on pretty high doses of medication. But obviously at that time I needed it. But somehow I think I'm stabilizing. But I will tell you, I have a list of things I live by today: medication, meditation, a workout, counseling, and being a service. Because being a service, there's nothing better, hey Corey, when you give a talk and people are crying and hugging and coming up to you and sharing their story. It's powerful, and it's very empowering to me to know that I've had people come up to me and say, "You saved my life," whether it was they read my book or heard me speak. I'm like, "Oh, really?" But now I believe it, because I know how deep and dark I was.
Yeah.
And it's stigma that they suffer in silence. And I had a girl come up to me. It was a high school, and it was amazing. I gave my talk, and of course I frame it for high school. And this girl, usually there's 10 or 12 kids out of 250 or 300 kids. There's always a few that come up that are kind of moved. Maybe it's the part of my talking about my childhood that they relate to, or maybe it's the mental illness. And she rolled up her sleeve.
Take your time. Yeah.
And she was all cut, mutilating, self-mutilating, which is sometimes a step towards suicide. You're hurting your body. And I was the first one she showed. And I said, "Wow." And we hugged. And I said, "Would you like to talk to your school counselor?" She said, "Yeah." We kept in touch after that on emails for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years. I can't remember what. And she was doing great. But she just had to hear that, maybe a big, dumb, brave hockey player, especially in Canada, were put on a pedestal, that shared something like that make her come out and step out and say, "It's okay. It's okay, because I suffer. She suffered, and we got something in common." And then the student counselor, she went on actually to get professional help with a psychiatrist and everything. I talked to her parents, and I was just like, wow.
Yeah.
All I did was tell my story and let this girl feel that she's not alone. There's lots of us out there that struggle more than you ever would, think. And that's why psychiatrists and psychologists and counselors, I just love you people.
Clint, one of the things that you mentioned about medication, I so appreciate, because there's such a negative connotation around the whole idea of medication. Not everyone needs it, but when you need it, you need it. You can't yoga your way or yogurt your way out of OCD when it's serious, or depression when it's serious. But I even I do spend a lot of time talking to my colleagues, to family doctors and other psychiatrists, but to family doctors, and say to them, how many of you treat hypertension with one drug, right? Nobody does anymore. So high blood pressure is treated with 2 drugs, 3 drugs. What about diabetes? 2 drugs, 3 drugs, 4 drugs. One of them is insulin. What's more terrifying than insulin? Yet when they talk about treating mental illness, more than one medication, no, that's too much. What does that say to a person?
Right. Well,
It says it's not that bad. You should only, if you can't get over it with just this one treatment, what's wrong with you, rather than maybe we haven't adequately treated the problem.
Well, I know that one medication can enhance the working of another medication.
Absolutely.
I know that because I was on Cymbalta, and they put me on Seroquel. He said Seroquel will help enhance the Cymbalta. So, and the other thing on the medication thing that I tell people, I said, well, if they don't want to go on medication, I said, that's your choice. I know for me, I'm walking around with a bullet in my head. Yeah. And I don't want, I'll take my medication because it's life and death. It's like if you got cancer, you're going to take medication or you're going to die. Yeah. You know what I mean? You're going to take treatment the stigma. Yeah. There's no difference of medication is medication. If you're anti-medication, if you're as sick as I am, I'm going to die if I don't take my medication. I'll go down that rabbit hole and it'll be deep and dark. Yeah. And once I get there, I'm pretty sick. I suffered with, at my worst, like paranoia. I thought the FBI was after me. I thought the CIA was after me. I remember I escaped from a hospital that my buddies took me to, and I just I got to make a phone call, and I bolted, and then the cops were coming, and I'm doing an army crawl through sagebrush here in the desert, high desert that we live in. The cops are looking for me, and a helicopter just happened to fly over, and I'm on the cell phone to my wife. They're looking for the FBI and everything. Yeah, the police were, but
yeah. Well, with the medications, I mean, that's the same. I mean, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be. Now I'm doing much better, but it's there if I need it. But we could get on the topic of medication all day today too, as well, and we will. But the other side that I wanted to look at with you, Clint, too, is we have a serious issue with masculinity, and we have a serious issue with men reaching out and getting help. And I mean, it kept me from getting help, and it sounds like it kept you from, there was, and, I guess just looking back at the whole masculinity thing and where we are today is much better. But, what are your thoughts on masculinity back then as opposed to today, and where do we need to go with it?
Well, we still got ways to go, but look what I did. I cut my jugular vein. I lost a third of my blood. I'm probably very, very weak coming back in 10, blood loss, coming back in 10, 11 days and playing at the highest level of National Hockey League. And that was all about ego, masculinity, upbringing, because of our fathers before, teaching us, you be tough, this and this. I think, what I really think this whole virus deal is going to change a lot of when we get back to pro sports and everything. Everybody's going to be a little more compassionate on things. We're all learning through this and growing on the positive side, growing as people and more compassionate towards our teammates in our case, or employees, employers. But we've come. But when we're talking hockey, it's a masculine, stigma-filled sport. There's a picture of me. I'm on my knees, blood. There's a puddle of blood. It's probably on the internet, and I'm holding it. And I didn't realize this till later. I had a cast on my hand. I shouldn't have been playing. I was playing with a broken thumb. Thus, the painkiller prescription, but I was playing through pain because of masculinity. Now, I don't think players do that as much today, unless it's the playoffs. I heard of, I think it was Chris Pronger, and we're going back a few years, but not back in my era. He was getting shots, and I've done that. I've had freezing on my fingers, broken finger, but I was taking. This is crazy. I had a broken vertebrae. I didn't know it at the time. And they were freezing my neck. We're talking about a spine. I could have been paralyzed possibly, but I couldn't feel anything. I'm out there playing. And, that's masculinity to the maximum degree where it's life-threatening, or I could have been a paraplegic.
Yeah.
Now, how dumb is that? But no one ever, not even the doctors, even questioned it. I said, "Shoot me up. I got to play." Okay, give you a needle in the neck.
So what would you say to someone out there, even male or female, that's that's struggling with ego and pride from reaching out? And I talk masculinity on the male side, but what do you say someone out there right now that I know what I would say, but what would you say about that somebody if that's keeping them from getting help?
Well, with my growth and education of dealing with my own mental illness and the stigma out there, I am a very, very insecure person. Even today, I have to work on self-love because I grew up in guilt and shame. So for me, when I make a mistake, I go to that guilt and shame. We all do, but most people go, "Okay, I made a mistake." Me, I get sucked in there because my childhood was built. If I had a good game as a kid, I was a great, great son. If I had a bad game, I was a bad person.
Yeah.
So what I try to ask people is, where's your self-love? Do you really have to impress somebody by coming back quick from an injury or pushing through a mental illness, hiding in silence and darkness? No. We need compassion and empathy.
Clint, I think it's interesting that hockey was in some ways your savior, but in other ways,
Absolutely.
the root of so many. It gave you an escape from a childhood that was obviously deeply distressing and deeply harmful, but at the same time, it kept you in that place where you lived by the highs and lows of the game from moment to moment and measured yourself completely by your self-worth was completely, and to be a making it worse, you were a goalie. And so, if the team lost is because you let a goal in. And so you probably wore so much of that. I don't know how you do that, by the way, either one of you. It's a tough job. And for what you had been through as a child, I can see that in some ways it was your salvation, and in other ways it was adding nails to that coffin that, thank God, you didn't end up in that place.
Well, I agree 100%. And, I know Corey with his OCD and my OCD. And I think if you got OCD, I think if you got any mental illness, whether you label it as depression, anxiety, OCD, panic attacks, I mean, there's a lot. If you got one, you probably got the other to different degrees. And the reason I'm kind of throwing this at Corey, I know when I played, with my undiagnosed OCD at the NHL, we're playing the most pressure-packed position as an NHL goalie. So when I knew I was playing a game, my OCD the night before, and now I'm worried, and now I'm OCD and about, I got to get sleep. And sometimes I wouldn't sleep. And then I'm worried about, I haven't had enough sleep. How am I going to perform? So my point being, Corey, when you're under pressure, I think OCD and probably all mental illness, Doc, you might want to pitch in on this, just explodes on us. Pressure and stress makes, at least it did with me, my OCD just magnified a zillion times. Say, Cor, what do you think?
Well, I had that. I remember those nights not sleeping, and then the next day you're worried you didn't sleep. So now they just compound, right? And then
on and on.
And I'll tell a quick little story, but if I had a bad first period, I would go in the locker room, I would get undressed completely, go in the shower, have a fake shower, come out, towel off, get completely dressed again, like I was trying to restart. And the guys on the team, I did my fourth game with the New York Rangers. I was a 20-year-old kid in the fourth game I'd ever played, and guys are looking like, the hell's wrong with this guy? But that was my brain overfiring. I can absolutely remember that.
Yeah, and we're supposed to be the rock. We're supposed to be the most mentally tough people, as the goalie, because you're the rock. You handle the pressure, and the team looks at you for handling it. And that's why I can just say I was a great actor. I could go to the rink and hide my OCD, and act. I was always funny. Kind of a team clown and everything. And at the time, I think I was actually feeling pretty good. Yeah, there was kind of a three-ring circus going on in my belly. But it was after the game or after the practice when I went home or was by myself. Oh, my God, it was not pretty.
Diane,
So
you're sandwiched between two goalies.
this is
A lot to uncover right now. Go ahead.
Clint, one of the things, just so we make sure that we continue to educate as we go through this, and there's so much. I hope you come back and you'll talk to us about PTSD and about.
Ooh.
We don't have to get into details, but
No,
it
I'm all
helped.
for it.
I want to
I'm
make
an
sure
open
that
book.
people need to learn a lot and understand how your early life experience makes you vulnerable to later life having challenges. But one of the things you mentioned, the word for it is comorbidity, that it is rare for someone who has just one mental illness. As a psychiatrist, I rarely see someone who just has OCD. They've had OCD, they have depression, they have ADHD along with that. Many people that I see who have OCD also have bipolar disorder, which is kind of the umbrella that explains all the rest. And then if you've had trauma, whether childhood abuse or chaos or neglect, or horrible traumatic events like you've had with almost dying a couple of times on top of that, that makes you vulnerable to developing PTSD, for instance. So it's a lasagna that you have, really. And so I don't like to look at people as a diagnosis. Diagnoses are important. They're how we do research, right? We understand that we're trying to treat this disorder. So whether it's medication or whether it's talk therapy, we try to capture people within a diagnosis and look and see how the treatment works. But a human being is an experience, right? These are the challenges. These are the symptoms you're having. This is how it's impairing your functioning. And that's how I like to try to approach things with the human beings I see is, what is causing you the most distress? How do we attack that and manage it so that you can get back to work, back to life, back to love? But you're not alone in having multiple diagnoses. That's so common.
And I understand, and I thank you for that. But my PTSD when I went behind this tack room in the barn there, and did the deed, and I'm in the treatment center, and they go, "You got PTSD," and I'm like, "What? Are you kidding me?" I said, "Why?" "Well, you cut your jugular vein. You had no counseling." I said, "Yeah, I had counseling." Me and the medical trainer walked out in our street clothes in front of the goal. On the ice, and we both looked around and said, "Yep, this is where it happened." Yep, you good? "Yeah, I'm good."
Okay.
Bump. We give the bump, and that was my counseling.
Yes.
So 20 years later, I put a gun to my under here and shot myself. 20 years of undiagnosed PTSD. But I was so you want to talk about masculinity and ego? Oh my God, I was so offended by PTSD because that ego and masculinity. Are you kidding me? I came back in 10 days. I was a rock star in Buffalo.
Yeah.
They got a band named Malarchuk to this day that plays, and I know they're horrible, but
horrified.
They have a great name.
Yeah, right.
Horrified that you came back when you shouldn't have been playing, right?
But I was offended. My masculinity and ego. The PTSD, I came back in 10 days. What are you talking about? I'm a stud, man, in Buffalo, New York. So my lack of education, the stigma, I was offended and resented it. I was in that treatment center for 6 months. In the first 2 months, they were trying to convince me of PTSD, but my masculinity and ego and that hockey mentality and rodeo cowboy mentality, not a chance. I'm claiming that. Yeah. But then you understand that our military people, but who are the most tough, mentally strong people in the world, men and women that go and they go to a job that they might not come home from. That is mental toughness. Yet I know in the US it's lower now, but at one time we had 22 suicides a day by the most mentally tough people. They go there and they come back and they're injured. They're injured mentally. And I work a lot with wounded warriors, and I've heard unbelievable stories. And and they go through the whole thing. They come back. They're tough. They've been trained, and they self-medicate and eventually attempt suicide.
Yeah, Diane.
Clint, I think that it would be great at some point to have a conversation about your childhood, and again, with always protecting you, but having worked in a PTSD clinic with the military and treating PTSD for the last 20 years, we do know the power of early life experience. And It's not a matter of blaming, because I'm guessing, Clint, just talking to you this short period of time, you know a whole lot about forgiveness, and you've probably done a ton of work with, hopefully, with yourself and with other relationships that you have in your life. But the trauma of growing up with a parent who's abusive, it's not, you don't even have to be abused. Just neglect and chaos can also make you vulnerable.
Right.
And my experience with some of these superstar military members that were leaders and then had experiences overseas where they didn't have any control, or, that were absolutely terrifying or horrific, and come back and have terrible PTSD. And what I learned was so many of them had an early vulnerability as well. Yeah. So, there's so much guilt and shame. I don't think PTSD exists without guilt and shame. And trying to help people to recognize, you didn't ask for any of this. This isn't fair that this happened to you, and that you've gotten this far, and you had to actually end up having your throat cut or being exposed to some horror overseas before it was just too much for your brain, speaks to your strength, to the incredible resiliency that you did have. But humans have a limit, and you hit a wall, Clint, and it's remarkable you went as far as you did.
Yeah, more than once I've hit some walls, for sure, because I did become a full-blown alcoholic, self-medicating, because, the core people that become addicted to drugs or alcohol, and they're mentally ill, or, PTSD is a mental illness, it kills the pain, it numbs. And the thing is, for me, what 2 beers, if I was depressed or anxious, would bring me up or calm me down or whatever it was. If my mind, the OCD, was going 100 miles an hour, a few beers would calm me down. But the problem with that is, Doc, and this, is what 2 beers would do. Then it was 4 beers. Then it was 8 beers. And then it was 12 beers. I was drinking 25, 30 beers a day. Of course, it was American beer, and I'm Canadian, so maybe it's not that.
You got to buy that.
So bad.
You know what, Clint? That's a very good point, because right now there's people that are, with what's going on, and Diane, I've talked about this, that are drinking their way through this stuff.
Oh,
right.
I know so many, and I've had, like, Corey, you've been to my ranch here, and I've had some through Wounded Warriors, meeting these guys, going to the hockey deals that we do and everything. I formed friendships through my PTSD story and theirs. And you know what? They come here and hang out for a few days. I do equine therapy now. And oh my God, they get around a horse, and it's amazing, and you're not riding a horse or anything, but you're bonding with this big, some of them never touched the horse, but you walk through some of this trauma, and it's incredible, and it's very emotional. And these men and women that have gone to service, and I've spoken at many military bases through Canada and the U.S. I got invited to the induction of General Milley, the highest ranking general, who is now inducted into, or brought into, a change of command, Joint Chief of Staff. He's the chairman of so he's the guy telling Donald, nope, don't touch that button. and
keep him safe, please.
Yeah.
Take good care of him.
Yeah, but it's just been amazing how many great people I've met through, being a mental health advocate. And I know, Corey, you can relate. You've met some great people that, we can't really say their names, but General Milley kept seeing me show up at these things, and he was there too to help his soldiers. And when he invited me, I was like, well, yeah, right, I ain't getting invited to this thing, because it was a really, Donald Trump was there, Pence was there. I'm like, wow, what the hell am I doing here?
Clint, you bring up another great point, because we talked about medication. I believe that in the power of great therapy, but there's also other ways that people can feel in control and get value. I think you mentioned faith, your therapy with horses. There are many ways that we can find solace and feel a sense of safety again. It's not just medication, but when medication is needed, it's important. There's a lot of other ways people get value or treatment that's worthwhile.
Well, my spirituality is a big part. There's a book that I highly recommend for a lot of people. You can read a book And it doesn't, depending on where you are emotionally or where you are in your life, it might not even speak to you. I've read a book and then I read it 2 years later and went, wow, this is a great book. But 2 years ago, I wasn't in that space. And the book is called The Untethered Soul. And it's a lot about spirituality and a lot about meditation, you know, and the world's going 100 miles an hour and we're just a little part of it, but we think we're, and the book really spoke to me. And I've given about 10 copies of that book away. And I always highlight every one of them, you know, oh, you can have it.
That's awesome.
Well, you gave it to me and I just got my ADD handled. So hopefully I'll get to it soon, Clint.
You haven't read it yet?
Well, I read
donkey
pages and then I get all anxious and I can't. So I'm focused now. Diane's helped me so much.
Yeah, isn't that it? Like, and again, it goes back to what I said. Like, depending on where you are in your life and emotionally, spiritually, or wherever, you can read a book and you might as well have been just flipping pages. That's why I put pictures in my book.
I did too in mine for that reason. Exactly. Corey hasn't read my book either, so.
I've read. They're all. I've read them back front to back.
Doc, have you read mine?
I didn't know you had a book. Now I'm going to read it.
All right, let's trade books. I'll send you
trade books.
So
I will.
Just before we wrap up, we're about 56 minutes here. We're going to try to go an hour. But where can we find your book? Where can we find you? Where can people get you to come and speak?
I have a website, malarchuk.com. You know, my book, you can get it on Amazon. Some bookstores still carry it. It's been out for about 6 years now, so they always revolve. But Amazon still has it. My email is canuckranch at yahoo.com. And you know, I throw it all out there because, you know, a lot of people, oh, you don't want people calling this and that. You know what? God spared me for those that are still suffering. So I'm out there, man.
That's so well said, Clint. Thank you so much for sharing your story and, you know, and your friendship with me too. And, you know, I've said this to you before.
Likewise.
I love you, man. You're one of my favorite people. And just thanks so much for coming on. And you've got a podcast coming pretty soon too, as well. So hopefully you'll have me on that and we'll get that out there as soon as it gets.
I told you, you're on the short list, real short list. You're one of the top 3.
Such an honor to meet you, Clint. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Doc. Thank you.
See you, buddy. Oh, isn't that a story? Hey, Diane. Wow. It's he's such an incredible human being. And he said it so well at the end there. He said, what did he say? He said, you know, God, he felt saved him to help others, really. And just an incredible human being. I love him to death. He's been so good to me.
He talked about something that I think is so important and valuable for people is recognizing the gift of giving to others, how he really gets so much strength from when he's helping other people. I don't think there's anything we do in life that gives us more joy really than being able to help other people. And there is the living embodiment of it. What a wonderful man.
Well, and there's healing in it, right? That's what I always tell people, that there's healing for me in helping others and sharing my story. And we'll get him back on and talk about some of his PTSD stuff, because I'd love to dip into that a little bit more. And just the resilience that he's shown. And the masculinity part for me with Clint is that this is a guy that is probably one of the toughest people I know. Like I'm talking fist fights. I'm talking on the ice. I'm talking whatever. He's a cowboy. Like he grew up on a ranch. Like what's tougher than a cowboy? And the masculinity piece of it is just incredible, that if this guy can reach out and get help and make his life better, you know, that should be an inspiration for the rest of us.
And mental illness, as you know, has nothing to do with being weak or tough, right? No. It knows no boundaries. And unfortunately, it's so much harder to accept and for people to hear you and for you to reach out if you have that barrier of tough guys don't get this. I should be stronger than this. This isn't okay for me. That's garbage. This is your brain. This is what your brain's doing to you. And there's always a path forward.
Yeah, male or female, right?
Male or female,
masculine, male or female. It doesn't, you know, there's females out there that are scared to reach out too as well. And then we touched on medication as well. And like Clint said, I mean, he wouldn't be here today without medication. Medication has saved saved me. It saved him. And we don't push medication on this. That's not what it's all about. We're just, but if you need it, you need it. And that stigma has to end for people. And I've seen children struggling, barely even be able to lift their head because their OCD is so bad off the table, and parents are fighting whether or not they should put their child on medication, right? And Clint is another medication has saved him as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, it was a real pleasure. Thank you, Corey, for getting Clint on, because it was an honor to meet him.
Yeah, he's an incredible human being. So what a week, Diane. Mental Health Week finishes with a bang with Clint Malarchuk. I don't know if we'll go every day moving forward, but we're going to try to put on as many of these as we can. And you can always find Diane's book on Amazon. And next week, I've got another good friend, Daryl Sador, who's the Stanley Cup winner. He's going to come on at some point next week, and we're going to have a chat with him. He's been through the gamut with addiction and recovery as well, and is doing really well. So what a week. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Corey.
We'll see you soon.
Take care.